The bus doors hissed open with a tired sigh, the sound swallowed by the desert heat that rushed in like a living thing. It was just past 4:30 p.m., that uneasy hour when Las Vegas stopped pretending to be glamorous and showed its sunburned, restless side. The street shimmered. Neon signs slept. The air smelled faintly of asphalt and dust. Ariana Lopez adjusted the strap of her backpack and hesitated at the top step. She had taken this route dozens of times before, Route 217, eastbound. Same cracked vinyl seats. Same buzzing fluorescent lights. Same driver with the calm voice and the perfectly pressed uniform. Nothing about today should have felt different. But it did. Ariana was 19, old enough to trust her instincts and young enough to doubt them. She felt that familiar prickle at the base of her neck, the one that whispered something was wrong without explaining why. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from her mother. "You home yet?" "Almost," Ariana typed back, glancing toward the driver's seat. The driver didn't look at her. He never did. His hands rested on the steering wheel as if molded there, knuckles pale, posture upright to the point of stiffness. His name badge, she had noticed it once before, caught the light. D. Mercer. Daniel Mercer. Ariana stepped off the bus. The doors folded shut behind her with a final pneumatic snap, sealing the sound inside. The bus pulled away immediately, tires groaning as it rejoined traffic. For a moment, Ariana stood alone at the stop, the sudden silence pressing in on her ears. Then she realized something that made her chest tighten. The street was wrong. The stop was supposed to be busy at this hour, students, commuters, people cutting through the strip of older neighborhoods that bordered the city's sprawl. But the sidewalk was empty. No cars idled at the nearby light. No voices carried from open windows. Even the wind seemed to have paused. Ariana turned slowly, scanning her surroundings. The bus stop sign leaned slightly, its metal pole rusted at the base. Behind it, a narrow service road stretched toward a row of low buildings, most of them shuttered, their windows covered with plywood bleached pale by the sun. She frowned. This isn't my stop. Her heart kicked harder. She pulled up her route map, fingers moving quickly. The GPS stop blinked, recalculated, blinked again. 2 stops early. That's not possible, she muttered aloud. She never got off early. Ever. A memory surfaced uninvited, Daniel Mercer's voice, calm and almost gentle, earlier that afternoon. Next stop coming up, he'd said over the intercom, just as the bus slowed. Make sure you have all your belongings. It had sounded routine. Harmless. Ariana swallowed and took a step forward, then another, trying to orient herself. The heat pressed against her skin, sweat gathering at her temples. She debated calling her mother, but didn't want to sound dramatic over something that could still have a simple explanation. That was when she heard it. The bus again. She turned sharply. Route 217 had pulled over 50 yards down the road, hazard lights blinking. The doors opened. Daniel Mercer leaned slightly out of the driver's seat window, his expression unreadable from this distance. He raised one hand, palm up, in a small beckoning gesture. "Miss," he called. "You got off too early." Relief rushed through Ariana so fast it almost made her dizzy. She laughed softly at herself. Of course. A mistake. An innocent, stupid mistake. "I thought so," she said, walking toward the bus. As she approached, she noticed something odd. The bus was empty. Every seat. No commuters. No students. No old man who always smelled like cigarette smoke. She slowed her steps. "I swear there were people on here," she said, half joking, peering inside. Daniel smiled then, just slightly. It didn't reach his eyes. "They got off at the last stop," he replied. "You're the only one I missed." Ariana hesitated. Something tugged at her again, that same instinct, louder now, sharper. She glanced behind her at the empty street, then back at the open bus doors. Her phone buzzed again. "Call me," her mother wrote. "I think I'll just walk," Ariana said, forcing a polite smile. "It's not that far." Daniel's smile faded. "Ma'am," he said, his voice still even but firmer now. "It's not safe around here. Not this time of day." The words settled heavily between them. Ariana's pulse roared in her ears. She took a step back. "I'll be fine," she said, lifting her phone. "I'm calling someone." Daniel's hand moved, quickly, but not hurriedly, to the door control. The bus doors began to close. Panic flared. Ariana lunged forward, wedging her arm between the folding panels. Pain shot up her forearm, sharp and immediate. "Stop," she shouted. The doors froze. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and something cold and calculating flickered across his face before disappearing entirely. "Please," he said quietly. "Just get back on the bus." That was the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw Ariana Lopez. By the time her mother arrived at the stop 20 minutes later, heart pounding, phone clutched tight, there was no bus, no driver, and no sign of her daughter. Only a blinking streetlight. And the growing realization that this was not the first time a girl had vanished from Route 217. By morning, Ariana Lopez was no longer just missing. She was late missing, the kind that made time stretch and contract in unbearable ways. Her mother, Elena, sat rigidly at the small kitchen table, her untouched coffee gone cold, her phone lying face up as if willing it to light up on its own. Ariana's room upstairs was exactly as she'd left it, bed half-made, charger plugged in, a pair of shoes kicked lazily against the wall. The ordinariness of it all felt cruel. She would have called, Elena said for the 10th time, gripping the edge of the table. "She always calls." The officer across from her nodded sympathetically, pen hovering over his notepad. Officer Grant was polite, patient, and clearly exhausted, the kind of tired that came from too many long shifts and not enough certainty. "Adults can disappear voluntarily," he said carefully. 19-year-olds sometimes need space. Elena's eyes flashed. "Not Ariana. Not like this." Grant cleared his throat. "You said she got off a city bus?" "Yes. Route 217. That made him pause. Just for a fraction of a second, but Elena noticed. She leaned forward. "What is it?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just, we'll file the report and follow procedure." Procedure. Elena would come to hate that word. By noon, Ariana's face was everywhere. Flyers appeared on telephone poles, gas station windows, grocery store bulletin boards. Her photo, dark hair pulled back, serious eyes softened by a hesitant smile, stare out at strangers who glanced, frowned, and moved on. By evening, social media had taken over. Missing teen last seen on Route 217. Anyone else think this is weird? This happened to my cousin's friend last year. That comment didn't go unnoticed. It came from a woman named Rachel Dunn, who messaged Elena privately just after midnight. "I don't want to scare you," the message began. "But my sister Lily disappeared last spring. Same bus route." Elena's hands shook as she typed back. "What do you mean?" Rachel replied almost immediately. Lily was 20. She worked part-time near Tropicana and took Route 217 home. One day she just never made it. Elena's heart pounded. Did the police investigate the bus? There was a long pause. They said there wasn't enough evidence, Rachel wrote. They said Lily probably ran off. Ran off. By sunrise, Elena had 3 more messages. Different names. Different girls. Same route. 19. 21. 23. All vanished within a span of 14 months. All last seen boarding, or exiting, Route 217 during late afternoon or early evening hours. Elena didn't wait for the police to connect the dots. She drove. She drove to the Transit Authority office, her hands clenched white around the steering wheel, Ariana's missing flyer on the passenger seat like a silent witness. When she demanded to speak to someone, anyone, about Route 217, she was finally ushered into a bland office with beige walls and a man who introduced himself as Mr. Harlan. "Missing persons cases are tragic," Harlan said, folding his hands. "But public transportation serves thousands daily. Coincidences can appear meaningful when emotions are high. For girls," Elena snapped. "For young women disappear after riding the same bus." Harlan's smile tightened. "Correlation does not imply causation." Elena slammed the flyers onto his desk. "Then explain this." Harlan glanced at the photos, his eyes flicking over them too quickly. "I'm sure law enforcement has looked into." "They haven't," Elena interrupted. "Because no one wanted to look." That afternoon, Rachel Dunn posted publicly for the first time. "My sister vanished on Route 217 last year. Today another girl is missing. This is not a coincidence. This is negligence." The post exploded. Comments poured in, some supportive, some dismissive, others chillingly familiar. "My neighbor's daughter stopped taking that bus because the driver creeped her out. Same driver every time. Why hasn't anyone said anything?" The driver. That word appeared again and again. Daniel Mercer. His name surfaced in a thread started by a college student who claimed she'd reported him once for unprofessional behavior. The complaint, she said, went nowhere. Within hours, amateur investigators online had pieced together what authorities hadn't publicly acknowledged. All 4 disappearances occurred on Mercer's shifts. Late afternoons. Eastbound. Route 217. The police held a brief press conference that evening. "There's currently no confirmed link between these cases," the spokesperson said, standing stiffly behind the podium. "We urge the public not to speculate." Speculation was already too late. By nightfall, candles flickered outside the Transit Authority building. Mothers stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers, clutching photos of daughters who hadn't come home. The air hummed with grief and anger, sharp as electricity before a storm. Elena stood at the edge of the growing crowd, Ariana's picture pressed to her chest. She wasn't thinking about coincidence anymore. She was thinking about patterns. And patterns, once seen, could no longer be unseen. Somewhere across the city, Route 217 completed another quiet loop, its seats empty, its stops unremarkable, its driver scheduled to report for work again the next day. Unaware, or pretending to be, that the city had finally begun to look straight at what it had been avoiding all along. Las Vegas woke up uneasy. It wasn't the kind of fear that screamed. It crept. It lingered in grocery store aisles, in parking garages, in the long shadows cast by bus shelters at dusk. Parents checked their phones more often. Teenagers shared their locations without being asked. And Route 217, once just another line on a transit map, had become a whispered warning. Don't take that bus. By Monday morning, attendance at 3 local colleges dipped noticeably. Professors paused mid-lecture as phones vibrated across desks, students glancing down at news alerts instead of notes. Ariana Lopez's face stared out from television screens mounted in cafes and waiting rooms, the churn beneath her photo reading. For missing women, all linked the same bus route. The city tried to move on. The city failed. At a bus stop near Flamingo Road, 19-year-old Naomi Carter stood frozen, her backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes locked on the approaching bus. The number glowed on the front display. 217. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure the woman beside her could hear it. Not today, Naomi muttered, stepping back as the bus slowed. The driver glanced at her through the windshield. For a split second, their eyes met. Naomi's stomach dropped. She turned and walked fast in the opposite direction, pulling out her phone with shaking fingers. Across the city, similar scenes played out. Riders crossed streets to avoid familiar stops. Some stood in the heat for an hour waiting for alternate routes. Others simply didn't show up, to work, to class, to appointments they couldn't afford to miss. Fear had begun to rearrange daily life. The police department issued a longer statement that afternoon, urging calm. There is no evidence of an immediate threat to the public, the chief said, his tone rehearsed. We are reviewing all relevant information. The phrase reviewing information was not well received. Online, outrage boiled over. How many more girls need to vanish before this is relevant enough? Why is the driver still working? Someone is protecting someone. That last comment struck a nerve. By Tuesday, a protest was forming, organically at first, then with purpose. It began with Elena Lopez standing outside City Hall holding Ariana's photo, her jaw set, her posture unyielding. She was soon joined by Rachel Dunn. Then by others. Mothers. Sisters. Friends. People who had never met Ariana but saw their own daughters in her eyes. Someone brought a megaphone. Route 217 is not safe, a woman shouted, her voice cracking. Our girls are not disposable. Cars honked in support as they passed. Some drivers rolled down windows, raising fists. Others slowed just long enough to shout, "Do something." The crowd doubled within an hour. News crews arrived, cameras snapping into place as reporters rehearsed solemn expressions. A banner appeared, hand-painted, uneven letters bleeding into the fabric. How many missing before you care? Inside the police department, tension simmered. Detective Marcus Hale stood in front of a whiteboard cluttered with photos, timelines, and transit schedules. He had been on the force for 17 years and had learned to trust patterns more than promises. They're not wrong, he said quietly to his partner, Detective Lena Brooks. We should have flagged this months ago. Brooks crossed her arms. We didn't have enough to pull a driver off a route based on online theories. For disappearances, Hale countered. Same route. Same shift. Brooks hesitated. You think Mercer knows something? I think he knows more than we do, Hale said. Outside, chants grew louder. Shut it down. Protect our daughters. Justice for Ariana. Transit officials released a brief announcement just before sunset. Route 217 would continue operating with added security measures. No explanation of what those measures were followed. It was gasoline on an open flame. The protest swelled into the night, stretching down the block. Candles flickered. Voices rose. Tears were shed openly now, no longer contained by politeness or patience. A young woman stepped forward, trembling as she spoke into the megaphone. My name is Kayla. I rode Route 217 every day last year. The driver used to tell me which stop to get off at. Said it was safer. A hush fell over the crowd. He remembered my name. My schedule. Things I never told him. Whispers rippled outward. Kayla swallowed hard. I stopped riding that bus because I felt watched. Cameras zoomed in. By the time the clip aired on national news, Las Vegas had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer a local mystery. It was a national reckoning. Late that night, Detective Hale sat in his car outside the transit depot, watching buses return one by one. His eyes followed Route 217 as it rolled in, brakes hissing, doors opening. Daniel Mercer stepped down, uniform immaculate, expression neutral. Hale watched him walk toward his car, unhurried, unbothered by the chaos unfolding beyond the gates. For the first time since Ariana vanished, Hale felt certain of one thing. Fear had finally reached the right place. And the city was done pretending everything was normal. By Wednesday morning, Las Vegas was no longer asking for answers. It was demanding them. The protest that had begun as a quiet gathering of grieving families exploded into something larger, angrier, and impossible to ignore. City Hall became the epicenter. Barricades went up before sunrise, metal rails clanging into place as police officers took positions they never expected to face, not against criminals, but against mothers. Elena Lopez arrived early, her shoulders squared, Ariana's photo laminated now, protected from wind, fingerprints, and time. Around her, the crowd gathered with a sense of grim familiarity. Faces that had once been strangers were now known by name, by story, by shared loss. Someone handed Elena a megaphone. Her hands trembled as she took it. "My daughter got on a bus," she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected. "She never came home." The crowd answered with a roar. "She did everything right," Elena continued, anger sharpening her words. "She trusted a public service. She trusted this city. And this city failed her." Cheers turned into chants. "Failed her. Failed them all." Across the street, city officials watched from behind tinted windows, their silhouettes stiff and unmoving. Inside the building, emergency meetings stacked on top of one another, aides rushing between offices with tablets pressed to their chests. The mayor's office released a statement at 9:12 a.m. "We understand the community's concern and are cooperating fully with law enforcement." The crowd laughed when it was read aloud. "Cooperating?" Rachel Dunn shouted into her own megaphone. "You ignored us for a year." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "My sister disappeared last spring. I filed reports. I begged for answers. Do you know what I was told? She didn't wait for a response. I was told not to spread panic. Panic spread anyway." Handwritten signs bobbed above the crowd. "Protect our daughters. This was preventable. Who erased the complaints?" That last one drew attention. A former transit employee, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a voice that shook with barely contained fury, stepped forward. "My name is Marissa Cole," she said, gripping the microphone. "I worked for the Transit Authority for 11 years." A hush fell. "I processed internal complaints," Marissa continued. "And I can tell you, on record, that multiple reports about Route 217 were flagged, downgraded, and buried." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "They told us the driver was valuable," she said. "Reliable. Never late. Never called in sick." Elena felt her stomach twist. "They told us not to make problems where there weren't any." Cameras zoomed in. Phones went up. The clip was live-streamed within seconds. Inside City Hall, panic finally arrived. By noon, the protest had spilled into adjacent streets, snarling traffic. Riot police stood in lines, shields gleaming under the sun, visibly uncomfortable. No one wanted to be the officer who shoved a grieving mother. Chants turned sharper. "Name the driver. Fire him now. Where's Daniel Mercer?" The name echoed off concrete and glass, unavoidable. Daniel Mercer, meanwhile, sat in his apartment 15 miles away, watching the coverage on mute. The television flickered with images of angry crowds and tear-streaked faces. He sipped coffee calmly, his phone resting face down on the table beside him. He did not turn it on. At the police department, Detective Hale slammed a file onto his desk. "This ends today," he said. Brooks looked up. "We don't have enough." "We have enough to ask questions," Hale snapped. "And if we don't do it now, the city will tear itself apart." Authorization came faster than either of them expected. At 3:47 p.m., unmarked cars rolled toward Mercer's apartment. At 4:02 p.m., City Hall's doors opened. The mayor stepped outside, flanked by officials whose forced expressions failed to hide their fear. "We are announcing the immediate suspension of Route 217, the mayor said, his voice tight. "And the administrative leave of the assigned driver pending investigation." The crowd erupted, not in relief, but in fury. "Too late," someone screamed. Elena raised the megaphone again. "You don't get applause for doing the bare minimum," she said coldly. Cheers thundered. Sirens wailed in the distance. Every head turned. 3 police vehicles came into view, lights flashing. Officers exited quickly, clearing a path. The murmurs grew louder, sharper, electrified. Rachel grabbed Elena's arm. "Do you think?" "I don't know," Elena whispered. Across the city, Daniel Mercer opened his door to find detectives standing inches away. "Mr. Mercer," Hale said, flashing his badge. "We need you to come with us." Mercer's expression barely changed. As the news broke moments later, bus driver detained for questioning, Las Vegas erupted. Not with celebration. With rage. Because deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just about one man. It was about how many warnings had been ignored. And how many voices had been silenced before anyone finally listened. Daniel Mercer had been trusted for nearly 15 years. That fact echoed relentlessly through the interrogation room, hanging heavier than the stale air and fluorescent lights. It was repeated in memos, whispered by union representatives, and spoken aloud by supervisors who seemed desperate to remind themselves as much as anyone else. "He's one of our best," a transit manager insisted earlier that evening. "Perfect attendance. No write-ups." Writers loved him. Now Daniel Mercer sat alone at a metal table, hands folded neatly in front of him, posture as impeccable as it had been behind the wheel of Route 217. He wore the same pressed uniform, though the badge had been removed. His face was calm, almost serene, as if he were waiting for a delayed appointment rather than being questioned in connection with multiple disappearances. Detective Marcus Hale entered first, followed by Lena Brooks. Neither spoke immediately. They let the silence do the work. Daniel met Hale's eyes and smiled faintly. "Am I being charged with something?" "Not yet," Hale replied, sitting across from him. "We just want to talk." Daniel nodded. "Of course." The ease of it unsettled Brooks more than outright defiance ever could. "You've driven Route 217 for how long?" she asked. 12 years, Daniel answered smoothly. "Almost 13. And you prefer it?" Hale asked. "I do," Daniel said. "Consistency is important. People like routine. It makes them feel safe." Hale leaned back slightly. "You ever think routine can make people predictable?" Daniel's smile flickered, but only for a fraction of a second. "I suppose," he said. "But predictability is comforting." Brooks slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs. Ariana Lopez. Lily Dunn. 2 others. Young women frozen in moments before they vanished. Daniel looked down at the images slowly, methodically. His brow furrowed in what could have been concern. "Tragic," he murmured. "I've seen their faces on the news." "You drove all of them," Hale said. Daniel didn't deny it. "I drive hundreds of passengers every week," he replied. "It would be strange if I hadn't driven them." "What wouldn't be strange," Brooks said sharply, "is remembering them." Daniel looked up. "I remember most of my regulars." "By name?" Hale asked. "Sometimes." "Schedules?" Daniel paused. "I notice patterns," he said finally. "It helps me do my job better." Hale exchanged a glance with Brooks. Outside the room, pressure mounted. Protesters had moved from City Hall to the police station, their numbers swelling by the hour. The chant had changed now, less pleading, more accusatory. "Arrest him. Say her name. No more lies." Inside, Hale pushed forward. "We found internal complaints about you," he said. "From writers. From co-workers." Daniel's eyes darkened slightly. "Complaints," he repeated. "I was never disciplined." "Because they were downgraded," Brooks said. "Buried." Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "Then I suppose that means they lacked merit." Hale placed a transit log on the table. "These disappearances happened during your shift. Same direction. Same window of time. Coincidences happen," Daniel replied calmly. "Especially when people look for them." Hale's jaw tightened. "Where did Ariana Lopez get off the bus?" he asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Her usual stop." "That's not what her phone data shows," Brooks said. "She exited early." Daniel blinked. "Then she must have been mistaken," he said. "Writers get distracted." Hale leaned forward. "She never texted anyone after that moment." Silence. For the first time, Daniel's composure slipped, not dramatically, not enough for anyone but a trained eye to notice. His fingers tightened against his sleeves. "I don't control what passengers do after they leave my bus," he said. No, Hale agreed. But you control where you stop. Daniel looked at him then, really looked at him. You think I did this, he said softly. We think you know more than you're saying, Brooks replied. Daniel smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. You're under a lot of pressure, he said. So are your superiors. The city wants a villain. Hale stood abruptly. This isn't about politics. Isn't it? Daniel asked. Or is it easier to blame one man than admit a system failed? The words landed uncomfortably close to truth. Hale turned to the observation window. Bring it in. The door opened, and a forensic analyst entered carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a bus camera hard drive. Daniel's gaze fixed on it. This was removed from your bus last night, Brooks said. Funny thing is, it was supposed to overwrite every 72 hours. Daniel swallowed. It didn't, Hale continued. Someone manually disabled the overwrite function. Daniel's comm fractured. That's impossible, he said sharply. Only supervisors. Or someone with maintenance access, Brooks finished. Like a senior driver with an exemplary record. The room felt smaller now. Daniel, Hale said quietly. This is your chance. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he straightened his uniform and exhaled slowly. You have no idea, he said, his voice steady once more, how many people looked the other way long before you started asking questions. Outside, sirens wailed as night fell. Inside the interrogation room, the image of the trusted bus driver was beginning to crack. And beneath it, something far darker was starting to show. The arrest happened at 9:18 p.m. It wasn't dramatic at first, no shouts, no struggle, no handcuffs slammed down for the cameras. Just a quiet decision made in a small room by people who understood that once this line was crossed, there was no going back. Detective Hale stared at Daniel Mercer across the table, the bus camera hard drive sitting between them like a live wire. Daniel Mercer, Hale said evenly, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and unlawful interference with evidence. For the first time since the interrogation began, Daniel did not smile. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked briefly toward the observation window, then back to Hale. You're making a mistake. Hale stood. Stand up. Hands behind your back. The click of the handcuffs echoed louder than it should have. Within minutes, the news broke. Las Vegas bus driver arrested in connection with missing teens case. Phones across the city lit up simultaneously. Protesters outside the station erupted, not in relief, but in explosive, unfiltered emotion. Some cried. Some screamed. Some fell silent, hands over mouths, staring at the building as if waiting for answers to spill out through the concrete walls. Reporters scrambled for position. Is this the man? Are the girls alive? Who allowed him to keep driving? No one had answers yet, but the nation was watching. Inside the station, Daniel was escorted down the corridor, officers flanking him on both sides. Cameras flashed through the glass doors as he emerged, his face expressionless, his posture unbroken. Do you deny the allegations? A reporter shouted. Daniel paused. He turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the crowd. I deny being the monster you want me to be, he said calmly. The statement went viral within minutes. Online, the reaction was volcanic. Some called him a predator hiding behind a uniform. Others, disturbingly, questioned whether he was being framed, pointing fingers at the transit authority, the city, the police. But the outrage intensified when leaked interrogation details surfaced. Screenshots of internal police notes began circulating, shared by anonymous accounts claiming insider knowledge. Mercer had access to off-route service roads. Mercer requested stop flexibility for passenger safety. Mercer logged unexplained delays on 4 dates matching disappearances. Then came the most chilling detail of all. A former transit mechanic came forward anonymously. Daniel Mercer's bus was modified. Not mechanically, but digitally. He asked how to temporarily disable GPS logging. said it was for training simulations. That detail ignited the firestorm. By morning, national networks led with the story. Las Vegas was no longer just a city under scrutiny, it was a warning. At the police station, Detective Hale sat slumped in his desk, exhaustion etched into his face. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Evidence was pouring in now, too much, too late. "We've got something," Brooks said, entering quickly. She dropped a transcript on his desk. "It's from Mercer's phone records. Deleted voice memos recovered." Hale scanned the page, his blood running cold. They weren't confessions. They were observations. Passenger compliant. Fear increases obedience. Uniform equals trust. Hale exhaled sharply. He studied them. He studied everyone, Brooks replied. The memos revealed a pattern, not just of movement, but of control. Mercer documented reactions, body language, hesitation. He wasn't impulsive. He was methodical. That afternoon, prosecutors announced additional charges were being considered. The crowd outside swelled again, larger than before. Elena Lopez stood among them, watching Mercer's mugshot flash across a giant screen erected by news crews. Her hands trembled, not with relief, but with fury. "That's it," she whispered. "That's all they're charging him with." Rachel Dunn stood beside her, jaw clenched. "They're easing the public in. They know what's coming." Inside the holding area, Daniel sat alone. His lawyer leaned close. "You need to stop talking to anyone." Daniel nodded absently, staring at the wall. "They don't understand," he said softly. "Understand what?" the lawyer asked. Daniel turned to him, eyes sharp. "That none of this would have worked," he said, "if people hadn't already decided not to see." The lawyer stared at him. Daniel looked away. By evening, the transit authority issued another statement, this one colder, more defensive. "We had no knowledge of criminal behavior. Any suggestion otherwise is misinformation." Within minutes, leaked emails contradicted them. Messages between supervisors referenced risk management, optics, and avoiding public alarm. No mention of safety. No mention of the girls. The scandal widened, dragging institutions into its wake. Las Vegas reeled. Parents pulled daughters from buses nationwide. Transit systems in other cities launched emergency audits. The question echoed everywhere. How many warnings are ignored before trust becomes a weapon? In a holding cell, Daniel Mercer finally closed his eyes. The nation thought the arrest was the climax. They were wrong. Because what the driver had done was only part of the story. And the truth, still buried, was far more damning than anyone had imagined. The story everyone thought they understood began to unravel on a Thursday morning. It started quietly, with a data dump. An anonymous file appeared online just after 6 a.m., shared first on a forum frequented by investigative journalists, then mirrored, downloaded, dissected, and spread at lightning speed. The folder was titled simply 217_internal. Inside were emails, audio clips, maintenance logs, HR reports, and meeting summaries spanning nearly 3 years. By 8 a.m., Las Vegas officials were no longer in control of the narrative. The first email went viral. Daniel Mercer is not the issue. The issue is exposure. Deputy Transit Director, internal email. People read it twice, then a third time, disbelief turning to rage. Another followed. We cannot afford another driver shortage. Flagging this as misconduct will cause public alarm. Operations Supervisor. Public alarm. For missing women were now being reframed as an inconvenience. As journalists dug deeper, a horrifying truth surfaced. Daniel Mercer had been investigated internally, twice. The first time was 18 months earlier, after a writer reported that he had insisted she get off at a safer stop closer to a service road. The report had been marked low priority and closed within 24 hours. The second time came 6 months later. A supervisor noted pattern interactions with young female passengers and suggested reassignment. The recommendation was denied. Reason: driver efficiency exceeds department average. Then came the twist no one expected. Daniel Mercer had not been acting alone. Not in the way people assumed. A leaked audio recording captured a closed-door meeting between transit executives and city risk analysts. The voices were calm, professional, terrifyingly detached. Pulling him creates liability, one man said. Leaving him creates plausible deniability, another replied. If something happens, we say there was no evidence. Something. Not someone. Not a person. Just something. By midday, the phrase plausible deniability trended nationwide. Prosecutors were blindsided. The district attorney held an emergency press conference, visibly shaken. We were not made aware of these internal discussions, she said. If verified, this represents a serious breach of public trust. Inside the police department, Detective Hale stared at the screen in stunned silence. They knew, he whispered. They all knew. Brooks nodded grimly. And they let him keep driving. But the most controversial revelation came late that afternoon. Buried deep in the files was a memo from a city contractor specializing in behavioral risk assessment. The memo outlined a pilot program. Objective: observe compliance behavior in controlled public environments. Daniel Mercer's name appeared in the participant column. The city denied it immediately. There was no sanctioned experiment, the mayor's office said. But the documents told a different story. Mercer had been classified as a cooperative asset. Someone who understood authority, routine, and influence. Someone who followed instructions precisely. Instructions like maintaining consistency. Like noting reactions. Like not drawing attention. Daniel Mercer, it appeared, had been protected not just because he was trusted, but because he was useful. Outside City Hall, the protest transformed into something darker. Banners were replaced with demands. Arrest them all. This was not negligence. Who authorized this? Elena Lopez stood in the center of the crowd, her face pale but resolute. They didn't just ignore the danger, she said into the megaphone. They measured it. The crowd fell silent. They decided our daughters were acceptable losses. That night, another leak surfaced, this one devastating. A recorded phone call between Daniel Mercer and a transit supervisor, dated 4 days before Ariana disappeared. Are you sure this is still okay? Mercer asked. A pause. Then the supervisor's voice, low and firm. Stick to the routine. Don't improvise. And don't create problems. Mercer replied calmly. I never do. The recording ended. By now, the narrative had flipped. Daniel Mercer was no longer the sole villain. He was the symptom. The system was the disease. In his holding cell, Daniel watched the coverage with interest. When his lawyer arrived, breathless and pale, Daniel listened without interruption as the man explained what had been leaked. They're saying you were enabled, the lawyer said. That you were protected. Daniel tilted his head. I was. That may help us, the lawyer said hesitantly. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. It won't. The lawyer frowned. Why not? Daniel leaned back against the wall. Because now, he said softly, they're going to pretend they never asked me to do anything at all. Across the city, resignations began quietly. A transit supervisor. A risk analyst. A deputy director. Each statement followed the same script. I take responsibility. I was unaware. I regret any harm caused. No one mentioned Ariana. No one mentioned Lily. But the public remembered. And for the first time, the question haunting the nation was no longer what did the driver do? It was. Who told him it was okay? The protests did not end with cheers. They ended with exhaustion. After weeks of shouting, Crying, marching, and standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the unforgiving Las Vegas sun, the crowds thinned, not because the anger had faded, but because grief has limits the body eventually enforces. Voices grew hoarse. Candles burned down to wax stubs. Cardboard signs sagged, their messages still legible but frayed at the edges. Silence settled over the city like dust after demolition. Inside a downtown courtroom, Daniel Mercer sat motionless as the charges were read, longer now, heavier. Obstruction of justice had grown into unlawful confinement, abuse of authority, and multiple counts tied to the disappearances. Prosecutors spoke carefully, deliberately avoiding promises they couldn't yet keep. The girls were still missing. No bodies had been found. No locations revealed. And that absence screamed louder than any verdict. Elena Lopez attended every hearing. She sat in the front row, back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed on the man who had last seen her daughter alive. She studied him relentlessly, searching for something, remorse, fear, recognition. She found none. Daniel listened as if the proceedings were academic, occasionally whispering to his attorney, occasionally glancing toward the gallery. When his eyes met Elena's, he did not look away. That, more than anything, terrified her. Outside the courtroom, the fallout continued. A federal investigation was launched into the Transit Authority. Subpoenas were issued. Servers were seized. Entire departments froze under scrutiny. Executives who had once spoken confidently now spoke only through lawyers. The city released an independent review. Its conclusion was devastating. Warnings were documented. Complaints were suppressed. Risk was assessed and tolerated. No one used the word experiment anymore. They used failure. Route 217 was permanently shut down. New safety protocols were announced nationwide, panic buttons, real-time GPS audits, independent complaint review boards. Cities promised reform with carefully crafted language and hopeful headlines. But reforms came too late for 4 families. Rachel Dunn moved back into her parents' home. She stopped posting updates after the trial began, her once fiery posts replaced by quiet photos of her sister, Lily, captioned with dates instead of demands. Kayla, the young woman who had spoken out at the protest, left Las Vegas entirely. She told a reporter later that she could no longer sit on a bus without feeling watched. Detective Hale testified for hours before a grand jury, his voice steady, his words damning. "We were trained to look for criminals," he said. "We weren't trained to suspect systems." He resigned 2 months later. At sentencing, Daniel Mercer was finally allowed to speak. The courtroom held its breath. "I never forced anyone to trust me," he said evenly. "They trusted the uniform. They trusted the schedule. They trusted what they were told was safe." A murmur rippled through the room. "I followed routines that were already in place," he continued. "If people want to be angry, they should be angry at the people who taught them not to ask questions." The judge did not respond. The sentence was severe. But it did not bring closure. Because closure requires answers. And answers never came. No locations. No final moments. No explanations. Just absence. Months later, Las Vegas tried to move forward. New murals appeared downtown, faces painted in bright colors, names written in careful script. Memorial benches were installed near former bus stops. People paused there sometimes, unsure whether to sit or stand. Elena visited one of those benches late one afternoon. She placed Ariana's photo beside her and sat quietly as traffic passed. A bus rolled by on a different route, its doors opening and closing with the same familiar hiss. People stepped on. People stepped off. Life continued, indifferent and relentless. Elena closed her eyes. She had learned something she wished she hadn't. Evil didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wore a name badge. Sometimes it followed a schedule. Sometimes it survived because too many people found it inconvenient to stop. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement, Elena stood and picked up the photo. She whispered her daughter's name once more, not as a plea, but as a promise. That she would never stop speaking it. And that the story of Route 217 would not fade into silence. Because the most shocking truth the nation learned was not what the driver did. It was how many people let him do it.